I want to talk a little bit today about my experience with upgrades and how I've kind of gone there and back again. Really all started because I was breaking parts constantly, hitting the walls, being an indoor flyer, and so I started moving towards the metal upgrades and the metal parts. And I went full board with that and bought virtually everything available, and I'm going to kind of go through some of those today and the problems with them. I noticed my heli was kind of sluggish, so I went out and bought a brand new mCPX, and right out of the box it was a lot quicker, a lot lighter, and it really was a lot more fun to fly. And it was right then that I realized that all these upgrades I'd put on had really added some extra weight and had really kind of slowed down my heli. So to prove that, I went back and reinstalled all my plastic parts, and sure enough, my old slow heli was basically as good as the new one. So that was one aspect of the decision of why I decided to go back to plastic for most of the components. The second reason is, while the upgrades, the aluminum upgrades and everything are good and tough, and I think really saved me a lot of money in buying new parts as I was learning, I'm just a little bit better flyer nowadays. Not great, but just a little bit better. And one big problem I noticed with the metal parts is they don't break. Oh, what do you mean they don't break? Well, that's kind of the problem. They end up bending and not breaking. And while that's great for getting started, once I got a little bit better at flying, it was really hard to detect when the heli wasn't flying that great based on a bent part here and there. So eventually I figured out I would just as soon have the plastic parts, because when they break I know that they're out of line and they're broken, versus being slightly bent and just not quite flying as well. So I've kind of gone there and back again, if you will, on what we should do with upgrades. And I think there's definitely a couple stages, right out of the box, brand new beginner. I kind of feel the metal upgrades, as you can afford them, are worth it because you're going to save money. But then in the long run, you might want to move back to the plastic, because the little bends that you get out of some of the aluminum really make the heli not as flyable. Now, one of the pieces I purchased was from microHelli, and the rotor hub I really liked at first because of the little loops right here, and these loops really helped keep the links from flying off whenever I crashed. And I really liked that because I didn't have to chase them around, and they didn't break, and I didn't lose them. So that little loop right there was really kind of a great feature. The problem with the loop was the links actually going down in them. Brand new links, the small side, won't fit through. I ended up having to sand the links down every time I wanted to put a new one in, although I didn't have to do it as often. And it was due to, if you look very closely, the link is actually out of spec. The mold is worn, and that happens with plastic parts, and so it's a little fatter than it was originally designed. So I can't blame microHelli for their part being wrong. It's just that the links, as the molds get older, parts get a little less tolerant. So that was kind of a disadvantage, but because I saved so many links, it was still well worth it. One of the next problems I had, and the one that really kind of got me thinking about the aluminum parts, was my heli was flying bad for a while, and what it ended up being, I eventually figured out, and I actually have a video out there, you might have seen it already, is that this, because it was aluminum, slightly bent in this direction just a little bit, and it was very hard to detect, but it was definitely affecting how my heli flew. So I decided I'd much rather go back to my plastic one because my plastic one would end up being at least breaking instead of bending. And really, I've never really broken one of these, so I think in the end it's probably a lot better just to go ahead and stick with your plastic one, even if you are a beginner, because I never broke one. Now the disadvantage is it still let the little links fly off here, but what I ended up doing on my current Hellis is I just glued a little piece over top of this and closed it off myself. It doesn't look pretty, but it works and it keeps the links from flying off. So I ended up going back and would recommend just going ahead and staying with this particular part. Now the next parts that I got were the microHelli grips, but my problems with these, and I also have a video out there that you can see, was that replacing these bearings at one point, I could not get the bearing out of down here. So this bearing in here was really hard to remove, and I never did remove it. But realistically, I never have broken one of the plastic ones either. So again, even from a beginner standpoint, I might go ahead and stick with the plastic on these. Okay, here we have the microHelli swash plate, and now the swash plate, I didn't really find any pieces bending on it. I did go ahead and add the little rubber grommets, and I've gone ahead and added the little rubber grommets even on my plastic piece. This guy is going to be a little bit heavier than your plastic version. It's a good piece, but again, I just went back to all plastic. Now, one of the most frustrating areas for me has been tail breakage and the tail boom breaking. And the tail boom breaking, I've gone through many iterations in putting solid booms on and things. And when you go to a solid boom, you're kind of making your own boom structure. And so you end up buying these pieces. Now, I ended up going through, I don't know, probably 5 of these things, and they're very expensive. I can't remember exactly, but they're between $10 and $20. But the problem with the design of this one, and the reason I went through them, was because the little screw that goes in here and connects this would end up snapping off right at the base, so that where it's screwed in, it was just sheared. And there was just no way to get that out of there or to replace that piece. So it ended up, there was no way I could fix this piece because the little screw was still left inside of there. The Rethinking Helli, I still have a package here, you can see. I switched to these, and they seem to be pretty nice and worked. And I never have had the screw shear off of these yet. And by the way, I am still using this particular one, this particular brand. But I have had to replace it, and that's why I have this in the package. Notice the cutouts here, and then there's a cutout up here. And that, of course, is to save on weight. But guess what? Right there's a weak area, and that's where that ends up bending. So I ended up using a little JB weld and welding that sucker together and filling in the gaps to make it stronger. But eventually it broke anyhow. So I'm still flying these. I like it a little bit better than the microHelli because of that's not shearing off, but it's still kind of a frustrating point. Okay, here's the big daddy. The big daddy is I got the microHelli frame. The main reason I went ahead and got the microHelli frame was because as a beginner I was shearing off the canopy pins where it holds the canopy onto the frame. And so the microHelli, these are removable and replaceable without replacing the whole frame. So that really, from a beginner standpoint, I thought was a good investment, and I really did end up replacing these quite often, and I wouldn't have to replace the entire frame of the original. Now that I have decided to go back to all plastic, though, again, not being a beginner so much, I'm not busting these off as much, so I don't necessarily need them as much anymore. And then when I bought this particular one, I went ahead and got the one that had 3 bearings, one here, one up here like the stock, and then one fits down in here. Well, you get all 3 bearings in there, in this particular frame, it ends up adding to the weight again. So that's one of the reasons I also went back to the plastic frame, was because overall this thing was pretty darn heavy. And one last recommendation, I had a hand in designing these, in inventing these, are the CF Canopy carbon fiber vinyl that sticks onto your heli canopy. And I've really found that they truly do prevent cracks from happening on your canopy, and I found them to be well worth sticking on there, because I was going through quite a few canopies and cracking along here in various places, and having to, when I was especially a beginner. Now the extreme canopies over here, you can get the carbon fiber for, and the canopy itself. Those canopies are a little thicker, so they're a lot less likely to break than the original flimsy stock ones. So the CF Canopy guys actually have, put out some really cool graphics on some of the CF that you can put on them. So I guess I've been there and back again, and I just found it really surprising that I would have gone back to plastic parts, but overall I'm really happy with how it's flying now. Thanks for watching.